Okay, so let's get right at it here. We're talking this half hour. We're going to talk about the Pope's dirty, poopy past in the Argentinian Dirty Wars, they call them. And I always said, what war hasn't been dirty? I mean, but anyway, that's what they call it. I guess every war has to have a name. You know, the big one, the Civil War. There's so many civil wars, I can't keep track. There's going to be another one here in America soon. And what are they going to call that? Civil War II, the sequel. Yeah, Hollywood will make a movie first, and then they'll copy the movie. You wonder sometimes who really controls these things. I think Hollywood, then they say, okay, we'll just do what they do. They do that with the moon. Hollywood does the fake moon stuff and all this fake stuff, and they go, hey, that looks good. And NASA goes back and go, we better not make it look too much like Hollywood. But it looks just like it. So, anyway, I digress. The Pope's dirty past. By the way, live stream August 27th, Monday, if you want to ask me questions. And we'll do that for as long as people ask questions. And minimum of 45 minutes. So, maximum 45 minutes. And that's August 27th, YouTube. You can go to my website, greganthonysjournal.wordpress.com, and get the link. And you can either call in on Skype, I'll have a number for you, or you can text, chat with me on that. They got the chat forum set up. Okay, the Pope's Dirty Past. I'm going to take a little bit of information from the mainstream here because they covered the story. This story has been covered when he became Pope. And, of course, like I said, nobody, they go, hey, this guy's Christ on earth, he can't do these things. But this so-called dirty war in Argentina ended about 30 years ago. Wasn't Argentina the country, if I recall right, that many say that Hitler fled to with all of his top people? I mean, we know that hundreds of Nazis escaped, and money and gold and all this stuff, and they say that he ended up in Argentina and lived to be an old age. I don't doubt it, because he did not die in those bunkers, that's for sure, and neither did Eva Braun. And the way to solve this problem, because there has been a lot of controversy about whether Hitler died in the bunker or he escaped Argentina in a submarine. He'd been, some people say, yes, we've seen him there before he died. And the best way to solve it, they have a gravesite for him to get his DNA off that body that's down there, and they won't do it. So who are you going to believe? It's very simple. Go get the DNA. Now you can do that. And let's see if the body that's in the supposed Hitler gravesite or wherever they got him, and Eva Braun as well, and see if it's him. They won't do it. I mean, they'll do it for some obscure murder that happened 30 years ago, right? But they won't do it on Hitler. So I tend to believe that he's not in that grave. The so-called Dirty War in Argentina ended 30 years ago. And the trials of the Argentinian military men accused of just horrendous crimes during that time are still going on. About 2 years ago, this woman was testifying, and she'd been tortured and raped in one of their concentration camps. And she was looking at the 44 men in the dock, and the named sadists she remembered. The one who looked one that supposedly might have burned her breast with cigarettes. The one who tied her up in whatever they're doing here. I don't even want to say it. And as the spectators in the court looked at the accused, they saw every one of the 44 was wearing a curious badge, white and yellow ribbons, the color of the Vatican, to honor the Argentinian Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio, who had just been named Pope Francis the night before. So here's this woman recalling being raped and tortured during the Argentinian Dirty War, And she's got to look at all these people wearing the Vatican colors when very well Bergoglio, or Pope Francis, was involved in a co-conspirator in all this stuff. So they weren't doing the new pontiff any favors, though, according to this article, because suspicions have surfaced many, many times over the years that Bergoglio was the young head of the Jesuit order in Argentina during the 1970s, and he took no effective stand against the systematic terror waged by the military and may have indeed been complicit in it. Today, these dirty war stories are entirely at odds with the image of this humble, kindly old man who appeared on the balcony at St. Peter's, a man of the people, the poor, who cares deeply about these poor people, right? So the Vatican spin machine has gone really into high gear over this stuff. And on a couple of years ago, I remember the Vatican spokesman, Federico Lombardi, issued a statement claiming that the attacks on Bergoglio, on his reputation, were the work of left-wing anti-clerical elements who are always attacking the church. Didn't I tell you? That's what they would do? Just claim that he's a martyr? How could Christ on earth do that? You know, I remember a story when I was in Rome, and I was sitting with this high-level Vatican priest, and there just came a book out called, what the hell was it? A Holy Blood, Holy Grail, something like that. It was about the bloodline of Christ, and supposedly Christ was not killed on the cross, and he married Mary Magdalene, and they went to France and lived a happy life, and he has children. Okay, and his children still, the bloodline of Christ still exists in the form of this man who runs the group called the Priore di Sion, and he's in France, and he's still alive. And these stories were appearing all over Rome at the time. And I remember reading the book that just came out. And I was, at the time, kind of like an atheist. And I was thinking, I grew up as a Catholic. This story about Christ can be kind of, I don't know. I mean, it sounds kind of fishy to me. A guy, I didn't hear anything about him till he was 33 and all this stuff. So, sure, I was a doubting Thomas. And I'm saying, well, maybe these guys had some great information. Christ married Mary Magdalene. He ends up going to France. He never was on the cross. A lot of things can change in history. I mean, it happened a long time ago. There's no actually YouTube reports on it or anything, or any filmed reports back then, right? There were no even newspaper articles back then. So how do you know? So that's the way I was thinking back then. And so I said, oh, this is a good story. How is the Vatican going to respond to the fact that these people are putting all these articles in the newspaper now saying that Christ never was killed on the cross, and here are all these, that's what the Vatican, that's how they make their money. I was sitting talking to the guy on a street where they sell all this stuff, crosses, holy water. I remember asking the guy, I said, do you just fill that up with water and then put holy water on it? Oh, no. The Father comes and blesses it. And I said, oh, really? Is that after he's drank a couple bottles of wine like me? Let me bless it. Now it's holy. So they make money on this stuff. And all these Americans and Canadians come running and paying. Guy bought a glass of holy water for about $20. I mean, now tell me that ain't a great business. I was thinking about starting one like that over there. I said, I'll get all these rosaries. I'll find all these people, and they'll give me these rosaries and all of these trinkets, and I'll say that this one was actually blessed by, make up all these stories, and it's cost $100. And, people are going to believe it, because that whole street right next to the Vatican was selling all these religious curios. I mean, and above were little shops, and occasionally you would have like a coffee shop that I was sitting in there. And so I got to know these people, and we had fun talking about it. One guy says to me, and I've told this story before, but it's worth telling, because, I can't take really doing a whole show on this poopy pope. So anyway, he says to me, do you know what the street really was before, right after World War II? It changed. They never sold religious stuff here. I said, well, what was it? They said, this is where the whorehouses were. On this side of the street was all the girls, and all the bedrooms were upstairs, and all the Vatican priests would come down there, according, as the political people too. And then on the other side of the street was the gay area, where all the gay people would go. Oh, really? How come it's not here? Well, after World War II, they had to change it. It was too close to the Vatican, so they moved it to another part of town. I said, where? They said, oh, it's about 10 miles from here. I can tell you exactly where they go now. Okay. So I'm starting to wonder, because I went there and I said, maybe I could get closer to the church, because I grew up as a Catholic, right? Oh, boy. This guy set me straight. So I'm talking to this priest about this book. Father, how are you going to tell the people, about this? It's going to, that Christ didn't die. What are you guys going to do? And he looked at me and said, my son, first of all, the people can't really handle the truth. And I'm going to tell you the truth. I said, okay, thank you. What's the truth about this book? Is it real? Do you have in your Vatican archives that he never died on the cross and all this stuff? He said, my son, I can't reveal those things. But I can tell you this, that a left-wing anti-clerical element always comes out every few years. How long have you been here? I said, well, only a year. He said, every few years they come out and they try to destroy us with this kind of information. It's not true. And I said, well, what happens then? He said, well, we have to just rely on the truth and tell the story as we tell in our catechism books. I said, okay. Little did I know when I tried to really get to the bottom of the story, that actually there were elements in the Vatican or the Jesuit order that were actually planting these stories and creating this kind of chaos, doing that old Hegelian dialectic thing. So you have elements in the church doing this, and then they'd fight back and forth. And I found it hilarious. And if you go back to some of my shows, I give you the full story of how I went to France to try to find the guy who carried the bloodline of Christ, which I couldn't do. But it was a fun story. It gave me a reason to go to Paris. So anyway, back to the Dirty Wars in Argentina that nobody talks about. You read it. When he became Pope, they had to talk about it. But like this Vatican spokesman, Federico Lombardi, said, this isn't true. This is the good Pope. The left-wing anti-clerical elements are always attacking us, just like they did back when I talked to that priest in the 1980s. He also noted that a Jesuit who was abducted and tortured by the Argentinian military in 1976 and who reportedly blamed Bergoglio for failing to protect him and possibly implicating him, had issued a statement saying they had been reconciled long ago. All right. So immediately now what people are going to say is, well, how could the Jesuits and him be involved in these wars when one of them was killed? Well, let me tell you, they can sacrifice their own so they can protect their name. And no better story than to go look for a priest right now named Father Dell'Oglio, Jesuit priest, who they said was killed by ISIS, right? But he'd been in Syria for years helping ISIS get started, is another take on the story. And guess what? A couple years after they said he was dead, he was found still alive. And that came out. They still haven't been able to really talk about this. But that gives me an idea that they do this all the time. They set up a guy, they'll kill him, and say, look, how could we be involved with this if our own are dying? Well, they'll kill their own to protect their good, to create a good name and keep their brand holy and clean. But in this article, the writer points out that the language of that statement was very carefully worded. It was even, one might say, Jesuitical. The priest in question is the Hungarian-born Father Franz Helix, who is now in his mid-80s, so he's a little older now, and living in a German monastery. As we have reported, and this was in the Daily Beast, Helix wrote eloquently in 1994 about his horrific experiences in captivity in Argentina and the many years of prayer and contemplation that it took before he could forgive the man who he blamed for what happened to him, the man he let others identify as Pope Bergoglio. So he's blaming the Pope, and here we go. Now they're trying to say they're going to try to discredit this guy somehow. The statement issued in Helix's name by the Jesuits in Germany, sure, of course, they're issuing their own proclamations here, today does nothing to clear up the facts of what happened in Buenos Aires in 1976. It only shows once again that Helix has indeed decided to forgive Bergoglio. Yeah, can you imagine behind the scenes? Forgive him or we'll kill you. Who knows? He was 80 years old anyway. But so the public story is he forgave him. And now he goes on to say, I cannot comment on the role of Father Bergoglio during that period. He notes that he celebrated Mass with him later, and as far as I'm concerned, the case is closed. He then wishes Pope Francis God's richest blessings for his office. Meanwhile, testimony in the ongoing trial, this was a number of years ago, of the 44 men charged with crimes against humanity in Argentina continues to raise serious questions about the Pope's performance amid the horrors that occurred in the past. Now, this is in the mainstream media. Can you imagine if you really wanted to get to the truth without speculating? It'd be god darn hard to do it. Just like it's ever hard to get to the truth about the Nuremberg trials. But there is one fact about the Nuremberg trials that should be thought about when you're thinking of this. When the United States, they sent our justice court, a judge, to oversee and to rule on the Nazis being put on trial after World War II in Nuremberg, right? The first really questionable thing here is most of the high-level Nazis had already escaped and were never put on trial. Secondly, you cannot find one of the many, many signs, signals, and words used by the Vatican back then that they were involved and supported the Nazi movement. That was all out of the court record. And thirdly, the judge was not alone when he came here. His overseer happened to be Father Edmund Walsh, a Jesuit priest who came with him to the Nuremberg trials. Now, that's never reported. And his role at the Nuremberg trials was to make sure the judge didn't screw up. So that's your history lesson on how you can't trust any of this stuff. So what do you think's going to happen here in these trials? They're going to try every way possible to cover up Bergoglio and Pope Francis's complicity in the tortures, rapes, concentration camps, murders, and all of these crazy things that were going on. To give you another idea to think about, when you go back to the horrors that happened in Russia, in Stalin's Russia, and the concentration camps that killed upwards of how many millions of Russian Orthodox, Jews, etc. in Russia. One thing that's never reported, that the head of some of the concentration camps was a Catholic priest that went to school with Stalin. You can find that, but that doesn't ever put in the history books because you're not going to get the truth. So how can anybody, if that would be reported, and if that is fact, how can anybody sit in a Catholic church? How can we even, allow the Pope to come here and we pay his bill? And how can we allow him to speak to Congress? This guy's could be complicit in rape and torture and murder in Argentina in 1976 and those years of that war, but we allow him to sit there and talk to our Congress? Are you kidding me? Well, no, I can understand it because they're all probably complicit in so much as well. So, according to the Human Rights Watch, there is little question that in Argentina, many senior churchmen, Vatican people, were complicit, this is fact, with generals. Argentine investigative journalist Horacio Verbitsky, in his book El Silencio, reports that one concentration camp was actually set up on church property, Catholic property, that had previously been used as a retreat by senior clergy. Now, let's give Bergoglio a break. Let's just say he was the head Jesuit, head person there. Now, if Horacio Verbitsky, in his book Silencio, can uncover this as fact, why would Bergoglio allow that to happen? He had to know that there was a concentration camp on church property, and if he was true and right and he wasn't involved in this and wanted to stop it, he wouldn't have allowed that. But he didn't. In the 70s, he was on a fast track in the church hierarchy. He'd been made the Jesuit provincial in Argentina. And if you know the importance of Jesuit provincials, I do, because I tried to contact every one of them here in America, and it's like harder to contact them than it is the Pope, or the president. I mean, there's Jesuit provincials, and they got this country all mapped out. You got to see how they organize it. And he was the head of the entire order there in 1973 when he was only 36 years old. And what's the specific allegations made about him is that he gained and kept that position for several years, not by taking responsibility and stopping the dirty wars, but by evading it and perhaps actually being complicit in them. Yeah, just like Pope Pius XII was complicit and Hitler's mentor. You see, they have a pattern here. To become Pope, you got to either be in bed with Stalin, Hitler, the Argentinian, everywhere you go, you're going to find the Vatican involved in these dirty wars, whether it be in El Salvador, whether it be in Syria, whether it be in Russia, in Germany, they're there. In Mexico, you name it. Now, testimony at the trial of the 44 military men focused on one particular set of crimes that remains like an untreated wound in the breast of many Argentinians. When pregnant women were disappeared by the military, they would be kept until their babies were born, and then the infants would be given away to couples the military deemed sympathetic. The relatives of those stolen children, the grandparents, aunts, and uncles, are still looking for them. Well, go to Pope. He's the God on earth. Ask him to help. Yeah, because he was involved in it. He ain't going to help. I'm crazy. Got about a minute here. Glad I looked. But in 1977, we'll get to this later. I only have a minute. So the whole idea, talking about this poopy Pope, is that it follows a pattern of other situations that have occurred where the Vatican seems to get involved in these genocides and then seem to have a way to talk their way out of it. And you can go to Africa and look at a couple of the recent genocides there. And I talked to some people there from a couple of those countries, and the Vatican imprints are all over it. But if you can't get to the truth about what's going on in Argentina or in Europe, how are you going to get to the truth in Africa? Back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.